And away we go, episode 1249 of the Galdi podcast. It is Thursday, January 29th, 2026. An NFL head coaching job that at times appeared to be wanted by no one now has been filled. The Cleveland Browns on Wednesday morning announced the hiring of Todd Monken as head coach. He spent the last 3 seasons as offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. 2 aspects of the Browns hiring Monken as head coach are relevant to the Washington Commanders. Number one, it would appear as if Commanders run game coordinator / running backs coach Anthony Lynn is not getting a head coaching job in this NFL coaching cycle. The Buffalo Bills this past Saturday evening announced having completed an interview of Lynn for their head coaching vacancy, but the Bills on Tuesday afternoon announced having promoted offensive coordinator Joe Brady to head coach. And the Cleveland Browns this past Sunday morning announced having completed an interview of Lynn for their head coaching vacancy on Saturday night. But the Browns on Wednesday morning announced the hiring of Todd Monken as head coach. Number 2, Todd Monken taking the Browns head coaching job means that he is not taking the New York Giants offensive coordinator job. He is not coming to the NFC East. The thought had been that he was likely to join fired Ravens head coach and new New York Giants head coach John Harbaugh as Giants offensive coordinator. Also, in the 2026 NFL coaching cycle, reports on Wednesday that Commanders defensive pass game coordinator Jason Simmons was to interview for the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive coordinator job. And this is going to be interesting with the Commanders reportedly hiring Minnesota Vikings defensive passing game coordinator / defensive backs coach Daronte Jones as defensive coordinator. How much change is there on the Commanders defensive coaching staff? Commanders insider Nikki Javala of The Athletic, she on Wednesday afternoon in a post on X said this, quote, "The Commanders defensive staff remains fluid after the hiring of Daronte Jones as DC, but the team is looking to bring on someone to oversee the front seven with a focus on improving the pass rush per sources," end quote. Hello and welcome to this Thursday installment of the Galdi podcast. Another question with Daronte Jones as Commanders defensive coordinator is, what will his Commanders defense in the 2026 season be like? Next segment, a high-level, all-22 style breakdown, as I'll speak with our guy, Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Mark has done extensive research and analysis on what we should expect from Daronte Jones, including blitz packages, the potential return to a 3-4 base defense, the potential heightened use of innovative match zone coverages, and which Commanders defensive players could especially thrive under Jones. Mark Bullock, next segment on what to expect from Daronte Jones as Commanders defensive coordinator. Also on the show, I'll talk college basketball. Georgetown beat DePaul 70-61 at Capital One Arena on Wednesday night. George Mason defeated Davidson 60-52 at Eagle Bank Arena in Fairfax, Virginia on Wednesday night. Before we get to feedback, so the Washington Wizards, they are home to the Milwaukee Bucks Thursday night at 7, and the number one story in the NBA right now is the Bucks because the Greek freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, wants out. ESPN NBA insider Shams Charania, he on Wednesday morning in an ESPN.com piece reported, quote, "Two-time MVP Giannis Antetokounmpo is ready for a new home ahead of the February 5th trade deadline, as several teams have made aggressive offers to the Milwaukee Bucks, who are starting to listen," league sources told ESPN on Wednesday, end quote. No, the Wizards are not coming up as a potential destination for him, even though they are set to have a ton of salary cap space for next season. Shams Charania in his report, quote, "The Miami Heat, Minnesota Timberwolves, New York Knicks, and Golden State Warriors are among the serious suitors for Antetokounmpo," league sources said, end quote. Here was Shams Charania with host Ernie Johnson on ESPN's NBA Tip-Off on Wednesday night.
Start with Giannis. So is he open to a deal? I know he said the other day, look, that's not my nature to ask for a trade or anything like that. How do things stand there?
Ernie, to put it plainly, he has communicated with the Bucks. He's informed the necessary Bucks officials that he believes the time has come now for both of these sides, him and the Bucks, to move on after 13 years, after he led this team, this organization, to its first championship in 50 years in 2021. Sources tell me he is ready. He is prepared to move forward with his career elsewhere, either at the deadline or in the offseason. And what's changed here is the Bucks' approach and process. They're getting tons of aggressive offers right now in Milwaukee, and they are listening to those offers. Those offers have consisted of all-star caliber players, multiple draft picks. And Ernie, this has been the culmination of 9 months. 9 months, Giannis and his camp and Bucks general manager John Horst, they've been discussing his future. What's best for him to be there, for him to be elsewhere? The Bucks at one point were pitching him on a gap year. They knew at the age of 30, 31, he didn't want a gap year this year. So they tried to salvage something. They waived and stretched Damian Lillard. They went out and signed Miles Turner, and they tried to give this another go. But this team is now 9 games under 500. They're in the 12th seed in the Eastern Conference, and they don't have any upward mobility right now, or really in the summer, to make this team into a championship contending team. And that's what Giannis wants. He wants to try to compete for a second championship. So what? Some of the Giannis teams, and there's teams in both conferences. I would look at Minnesota, Golden State in the West, New York and Miami. Those are 4 of the strong suitors for Giannis right now on the market.
It never ceases to amaze me how so much of the modern NBA is about which superstar is unhappy and wants to be traded. Like, that is the league right now, following which superstars are disgruntled and want out. And the latest is the Greek Freak, and we have the Wizards home to the Bucks on Thursday night. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. From Scott S. on X with an interesting question. Right, Scott? Odd question for you. If you put the lasso of truth around Terry Pegula, which do you think he'd rather see? The Bills win a Super Bowl or his daughter Jessica win a Grand Slam event? I watched her match in the quarterfinals on Tuesday and was wondering. Thank you for that, Scott. Terry Pegula, owner/CEO/president of the Buffalo Bills. His daughter is tennis star Jessica Pegula, the number 6 seed in women's singles at the ongoing 2026 Australian Open. Would Terry Pegula rather the Bills win a Super Bowl or his daughter win a Grand Slam event? Tough question. Hard to answer. I'll say this as a parent. Not a very good one, but I do qualify as a parent. You, as a parent, root like crazy for your kids to do well, right? My son is 8. He plays basketball and soccer, and when he plays, I outwardly don't say much, but I deep down inside am rooting so hard for him to do well. So I would not be stunned if Terry Pegula would prefer his daughter win a Grand Slam event over the Bills winning a Super Bowl, but who knows? Here's a question. Josh Harris. He is the Washington Commanders managing partner. He is a co-managing partner of the Philadelphia 76ers. He is a co-managing partner of the New Jersey Devils. Would he rather the Commanders win a Super Bowl, the Sixers win an NBA title, or the Devils win a Stanley Cup? If we put the lasso of truth around Josh Harris, what would his answer be? I'd like to think that his answer would be the Commanders winning a Super Bowl because that team is the most valuable of those 3 teams, and he grew up as a Redskins fan, but we, of course, can't say for sure that his answer would be the Commanders winning a Super Bowl. And here's maybe the ultimate question, and I'm afraid to even ask this question, but I'll ask it anyway. What means more to Joe Gibbs? Him having won 3 Super Bowls as Redskins head coach, or him having won 5 NASCAR Cup Series championships as owner and founder of Joe Gibbs Racing? That, my friends, is a frightening question because it is entirely possible that Gibbs, if he was subjected to the lasso of truth, would say that winning 5 NASCAR Cup Series championships as owner and founder of Joe Gibbs Racing means more than winning 3 Super Bowls as Redskins head coach. A, more titles, right? 5 versus 3. B, he has run Joe Gibbs Racing for a lot longer than he was Redskins head coach. Joe Gibbs Racing started in 1992. And C, Joe Gibbs Racing has been much more of a family affair for Gibbs than him serving as Redskins head coach. What means more to the great Joe Gibbs, him having won 3 Super Bowls as Redskins head coach, or him having won 5 NASCAR Cup Series championships as owner and founder of Joe Gibbs Racing? Yeah, there you go. The classic Joe Gibbs laugh. Email from Asim from the Jersey Shore on the state of the Commanders, writes Asim. Al, love the show. Literally never miss any podcast. Always have great guests regarding our Skins/Commanders. Everything about championship weekend was an example of mismanagement of the franchise. Broncos digging out of the Russell Wilson trade and contract, trading for Sean Payton, and drafting Bo Nix, who is more than adequate, and the Broncos have a top-notch defense. The Patriots drafted Drake May, who is tough and seems to be a better quarterback than what we have. Better coaches, top to bottom. They're now in the Super Bowl. The Seahawks head coach clearly is better than Dan Quinn. Why did the Seahawks outbid us for him? And they have a staff better than the Deadskins staff. Sam Darnold is better and tougher than what the Deadskins have. He survived 2 other teams before going to Seattle. The Rams have an older quarterback, but he's tougher than our quarterback. And they figure out more with less. I have less faith than ever with our quarterback, and we clearly have a lame duck coach and a less than impressive general manager. If everyone wants to prove all of us wrong, then spend as much of our precious cap money with studs, and the team better effing nail this draft. 12-5 was a dream. A respectable franchise can't fall to 5-12 and get embarrassed as many times as we did. Yes, I say we. I have to explain again and again to my children why we love this team. The team has a lot of fans to make up to. Again, love you, Al. We'll never miss a show. Well, thank you very much for the email, Asim. Asim, not exactly super optimistic about the Commanders right now. Do you know what struck me as much as anything, though, from Asim's email? And this may surprise you, but he said that the coaching staff of Seattle Seahawks head coach Mike Macdonald is better than the coaching staff of Commanders head coach Dan Quinn. You know what's funny about that? The narrative in the 2024 offseason was that one of the reasons that the Commanders were better off having hired Quinn instead of Macdonald was that Quinn did a better job of building a quality staff, and that Macdonald had a hard time building his staff, that the well-connected Quinn was able to get better assistants than the first-time head coach, Macdonald. Do you remember that narrative? Because that narrative was very much a thing. Well, how is that narrative looking now? Dan Quinn's choice for Commanders defensive coordinator Joe Witt Jr. lasted for less than 2 seasons. Dan Quinn's choice for Commanders offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury lasted for just 2 seasons. I like Dan Quinn. I hope that he as Commanders head coach has great success. But something that I never liked was how you in the 2024 offseason, when it came to some fans and some media members, were not allowed to question whether Quinn truly was the Commanders' top choice for head coach, or were not allowed to bring up, hey, what about this reporting that the team actually preferred Mike Macdonald over Quinn? That reporting happened and then disappeared. Not on this podcast. On this podcast, plenty of times have brought up the reporting that the Commanders actually preferred Macdonald over Quinn, that the team offered the head coaching job to Macdonald. And we see what Macdonald is doing as Seahawks head coach. Hey, please consider subscribing to this podcast if you're not already doing that. Subscribing to the podcast costs nothing. Make sure that you never miss an episode and helps out the podcast a lot. And if you're already subscribing, thank you. So what should we expect from Daronte Jones as Washington Commanders defensive coordinator? It is a pleasure to welcome back to the Al Galdi podcast Commanders analyst Mark Bullock. Mark is exceptional at talking Commanders from an X's and O's standpoint. He does tremendous Commanders All-22 breakdowns. You can read his work on his Substack, Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. And Yada's Substack on Tuesday morning put up a breakdown of the Commanders hiring Daronte Jones. Mark's Substack is a must-read if you're a fan of the team. He has written for The Athletic and for The Washington Post. Also, he is a Commanders fan. You can follow Mark on X at Mark Bullock NFL. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks. How about you?
Doing well. Good to talk to you. Before we get deep into the analysis, bottom line, the Commanders hiring Daronte Jones as defensive coordinator. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yeah, I'm relatively a thumbs up for it. When you take into the context of kind of how this situation had dragged on and it kind of felt like it was leaning towards they were not going to get some sort of they certainly weren't going to get a big swing candidate. So it felt like it might have been leaning more towards some sort of retread. So to get someone that has never been a coordinator before, but has come from a really good system and it brings a potential. I guess the unknown is exciting, I guess, somewhat. But certainly the system that he comes from and the coaches that he's learned from have had a lot of success in the NFL. So I think there is an excitement factor to that, and certainly the style of defense that he's likely to try to implement, could fail spectacularly given how aggressive it is. But I think it will at least be somewhat entertaining to watch. It'll either be sort of boom or bust and feast or famine sort of thing. So, I prefer that. It's a bold move, but I prefer that to the kind of safe, promoting Ken Norton from internal or hiring a sort of retread that's been there and done that, and we've seen kind of what they've done, and they haven't been spectacular before. So I'm on board with it.
Daronte Jones spent 5 of the last 6 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. He was the Vikings defensive backs coach for the 2020 and 2022 seasons. He was the Vikings defensive passing game coordinator / defensive backs coach for the 2023 through 2025 seasons. So these last 3 seasons were spent working under Brian Flores as Vikings defensive coordinator. We had discussed Flores as a dream get for the Commanders as defensive coordinator. They, on January 14th, reportedly interviewed Flores for their defensive coordinator vacancy, but the Vikings on January 21st announced having signed Flores to a contract extension. But Jones was regarded as the right-hand man of Flores. In fact, fantasy football expert and Minnesota Vikings media personality Paul Charchian, he on Wednesday's show, episode 1248, said that Jones would have replaced Flores as Vikings defensive coordinator had Flores left the Vikings. So you think about this, are the Commanders getting the Brian Flores defense just without Brian Flores?
I think you would expect something similar. I don't think you can ever get the exact same, a carbon copy of it, because obviously they don't have the right personnel for it as things stand. And Brian Flores is his own man. He comes up with his own crazy blitzes, and everyone talks about anyone that has been on the record about this the last couple of days. It tells you that Brian Flores is his own guy and comes up with crazy blitzes and is such an outside of the box thinker that it's impossible to replicate what he comes up with. But, Jones has been his right-hand man for the past couple of years, and he's been heavily involved with everything that Flores has done with the blitz schemes, because he's the pass game coordinator. He's the DB's coach. So he's been the guy that's having to develop the coverages to go behind it and adjust, if we're blitzing a safety, I need someone else to drop in coverage to replace that guy. And so he's got to figure out the coverage to work with that. So you would think he's picked something up along those lines. Maybe his version is maybe a slightly dialed down version. I think I saw somewhere that it was the Vikings were blitzed something like 49% of the time on first down and like 48% of the time on second down, which is an insanely high rate when you compare like the rest of the league is like between 20 and 35% on those downs. So they blitz an incredibly high amount. That's how aggressive it is. Maybe that comes down slightly based on him not being Brian Flores and the personnel that they'll have in Washington, but I think it will still be a much more aggressive style of defense compared to what we've just seen.
You in your Substack piece on the Commanders hiring Daronte Jones, especially focused on 3 aspects of what he might do as the team's defensive coordinator: fronts, coverages, and blitz packages. Regarding fronts, so what has been the case in the NFL for decades now is that a team's base defense doesn't matter as much as it used to, because most teams have at least 3 defensive backs when on defense the overwhelming majority of the time. But a base defense still does matter, and you believe that we might see the return of the 3-4 base defense for Washington. Should we anticipate the 3-4 being back?
Yeah, I think so. It is worth pointing out, he's been under coaches like Vance Joseph and Mike Zimmer, where they coached a 4-3. So perhaps under Dan Quinn, he does that. But to do what they were doing in Minnesota, you would need to do a 3-4 because they had edge rushers or outside linebackers that were very versatile. Both guys were comparable pass rushers. They were decent with pass rush, but they could also, especially a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel, made that defense tick because he could pass rush, but he could also drop back into coverage. So whenever they were doing the different kind of blitzes where it was like they'd overload from one side and the outside linebacker on the other side would drop off, like if that's your standard defensive end, they're going to struggle in that role. But Van Ginkel, being kind of a hybrid linebacker type, works quite well in that role. So yeah, I think they will be looking at transitioning to a 3-4, and I think yes, most teams tend to play in some form of nickel more often than not now, but the Vikings tended to stay in a 3-4 front, and they would have different personnel packages, but they would keep their three defensive tackles on the field as kind of your three down linemen, and they typically would have two outside linebackers, so they would have effectively five men on the line of scrimmage at all times. Now, not all five would rush. As I said, some of those guys would drop out depending on what kind of blitz they were doing, but they would tend to have those kind of front five guys, one linebacker behind them, and then they leaned into more of a three safety look. I don't know whether that was their preference or whether that was they had more safeties than corners. Exactly how that panned out, but from the 5 or 6 Vikings games I watched, they leaned a lot more into a three safety sort of big nickel look, and then that meant that safety could kind of almost become a dime linebacker kind of role, where he filled in as a linebacker, and you kind of still got the sort of 3-4 look. So I think get familiar with that kind of 3-4 look, because I think we will probably see a fair bit of it.
The Redskins were a 4-3 team on defense forever, and then went with a 3-4 base defense for a decade. The 2010 through 2019 seasons, the results were not good. Although I don't think that was because the team went with a 3-4 base. The defenses just mostly were not good. But in the current NFL, 4-3 versus 3-4, is there at this point a pretty healthy mix, especially considering that nickel is the true base for every team?
Yeah, for the majority of teams will mix and match nowadays, and even Washington this past season, we saw quite a lot of them. It was technically 4 down linemen, but it was 3 defensive tackles with like either Daron Payne or Javon Kinlaw sometimes playing as a kind of a big defensive end. And then right before the snap, they would all shuffle down the line, and Frankie Louvu would go from a linebacker to kind of an edge rusher, and you'd effectively get that same 5-man front look that you would get in a 3-4. And I think that's how the majority of defenses around the league look to play now. They will shift between kind of a 4-man front and a 3-man front in their base personnel, and they will have kind of flexible players where you have a somewhat kind of hybrid defensive tackle, defensive end that's kind of maybe more in the 280, 290 pound range that could kind of pass as a 4-3 defensive end, but could also play as a 3-4 defensive tackle. And that gives you that flexibility. You have a linebacker like a Frankie Louvu type that is a linebacker but can line up on the edge. You can shift between fronts. And I think that's what the majority of defenses try to do now, is have that flexibility to shift between fronts based on what they are anticipating the opposition to do on any given week. You do still see the occasional team that sticks to one or the other, and the Vikings, it stood out to me that they stuck more to that kind of 3-4 base, certainly with that 5-man front more often than not. So that they were less flexible in that regard, but they were more flexible in the different kind of personnel that you'd use to get there. But yeah, I think that is the trend of the league, is that you tend to see it kind of mix and match.
They're in the 2026 offseason, maybe / probably / hopefully will be a lot of change for the Commanders defense in terms of players. That said, the defensive linemen and linebackers as currently constituted, are they more suited for a 3-4, a 4-3, or does none of this matter given the talent level?
Yeah, I've been toying around with this one. I think their defensive line, their interior defensive line is sort of the strength of the defense, if you can call it that, with, Daron Payne, whether he's here or there, or goes based on his contract. And I know Ben Standig has been reporting that he might well end up playing on that contract this year. Javon Kinlaw and Johnny Newton, that kind of gives you a nice interior trio. And if you, I don't know whether they will or not, but if you bring back an Eddie Goldman, that gives you kind of a natural nose tackle for that kind of 3-4 look. And that's why we saw a lot of that this year, with kind of 3 interior defensive linemen, and then kind of a Dorrance Armstrong on one side and Frankie Louvu kind of switching down to the other side. So you kind of have guys that are flexible that can do that kind of thing. But when you look at the profiles of players, I don't I kind of don't feel like they're more suited to one or the other. I feel like you're going to have to overhaul pretty much most of the front anyway. So it's not like you have a star 3-4 edge rusher that you couldn't trust as a 4-3 defensive end or vice versa, right? So I think they're. I think if you want to look at it in an optimistic way, you can say it's a clean slate that you can build it whichever way you want to build it. If you want to look at it as a pessimistic way, it's they're lacking talent. You need to rebuild whichever way you're going to do it.
Yeah, the slate is too clean. That's a big part of the problem. Potential coverages for the Commanders with Daronte Jones as defensive coordinator. You in your Substack piece wrote, quote, while they blitz a lot, the Vikings rarely played straight man coverage behind those blitzes, end quote. That's interesting. That's a departure from the way that things usually work. Expound on that, if you would.
Yeah, so it is kind of a unique defense in that regard, because typically when you think of NFL defenses, you think of blitzing, you associate that with man coverage. And from an offensive point of view, when you see a blitz coming, you're thinking, oh, I'm getting a blitz. I need to think of my best man-to-man matchup. For the Commanders, that would be, oh, I'm getting blitz. Let's go to Terry McLaurin, right? And that's kind of what the Vikings feel like is going to happen, and they try to kind of trap you with that. And the reason that is the way people see things is, when you think of a blitz, when you think of zone coverage, you think of dropping 7 players into different zones. And that could be cover 3 with 3 deep, 4 underneath. That could be quarters with 4 deep, 3 underneath. It could be Tampa 2 with 2 deep and 5 underneath, or whatever you want to do. But you typically have 7 defenders dropping into those zone coverages. When you blitz a 5th or 6th defender, suddenly you have less players in coverage, and it's very hard to split the field into those zone coverages with less defenders. So you typically have to start playing more man coverage behind that blitz. So that's why you typically associate blitzes with man coverage. But the Vikings kind of decided that they just weren't going to do that. They were going to try to flip the script and trap quarterbacks and do something different. And so Jones's background, he came up a lot with Vance Joseph, and Vance Joseph is big in the kind of, not necessarily the Vic Fangio tree, but the kind of quarters coverage stuff that Vic Fangio does. It's kind of a lot of match quarters, and so it's a lot of zone coverage, but it's not just spot dropping to a certain zone and eyes on the quarterback, and you kind of play it from there. It's more you're responsible for, say, a deep quarter of the field. If you're a safety, you're responsible for a deep quarter of the field, but you're reading the releases of multiple different receivers, and then you match your coverage based on how those routes kind of distribute out. And so that's what Jones kind of brought to the Vikings, is that kind of match quarters or match zone coverage principles. And typically, again, that's done with kind of 7 men in coverage, but the Vikings like to blitz a lot. And so what they have learned to do is they've learned to do fire zone coverages, which fire zones aren't new. Fire zones go back to like sort of Don Capers and the old Packers stuff and this old Steelers stuff, and where you would rush 5 and you would go into 3 deep zone and 3 underneath. So kind of like a mix of a cover 3 deep in the quarters with 3 underneath deep. 3 underneath. So that you'd have 3 deep, 3 underneath, and that would be your fire zone. You'd rush to another 5. And that's typically the way teams zone blitz, and that has been forever. But what the Vikings do with Jones and Flores is they play match quarters, so they have 4 deep defenders, so the 2 outside corners and the safeties, and then whichever 2 linebackers or defensive linemen or edge rushers that don't blitz, they drop off into coverage. They will play as part of the match responsibilities. So typically, if you get let's take a situation where it's a 2-by-2 set. So you have 2 receivers on one side, 2 receivers on the other. Usually the back ends up staying in to protect. So it's 2-by-2. When you play that kind of match quarters, you're looking to get essentially a triangle of 3 defenders over the top of those 2 receivers. And then those 3 defenders can match their responsibilities to those receivers based on how they run around. So if a receiver breaks out, the outside corner will take that. If another receiver breaks in on like a post, the safety will take that, and that's how they will match those up. And you get that on both sides of the field. If you have 6 defenders dropping into coverage and you have 4 deep and 2 underneath, you can kind of spread it out that way, and you get your triangle coverage that way. So that's the kind of thing that they like to do, is very hard to execute. It's something that needs a lot of very good communication and very clear, understanding of what the rules are with each coverage. And it needs every player on the same page. Otherwise, match coverages can bust worse than anyone else if they don't have that communication. And we know how communication has been an issue in Washington for a while. But when it's executed well, it provides an incredibly effective quarters coverage with an extra rusher or an extra couple rushers blitzing. And it makes it a very, very hard defense to play against. And that's what we saw in Minnesota.
Much more with Mark Bullock in moments, but if you are planning a wedding or you know someone who is, check out or have that person check out cateringbyuptown.com. Catering by Uptown delivers not just delicious food of the highest quality, but also a flawless and memorable experience tailored to your special day. Catering by Uptown's team is dedicated to meeting your every need with elegance and precision. If you visit cateringbyuptown.com and click on venues, you can set up your own personal tour of one of Catering by Uptown's premier venues, including outstanding waterfront venues. Also, Catering by Uptown is great for parties, so whether a birthday, an anniversary, a retirement, or a charity gala, Catering by Uptown understands that special events deserve to be celebrated in style. Catering by Uptown takes care of every detail so that you can enjoy your event. Catering by Uptown is a family business. It is run by the Pereiras, who are great Commanders fans and loyal supporters of this podcast. Visit cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you. That's cateringbyuptown.com and make sure that you mention that Al Galdi sent you. We're talking Daronte Jones with Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Match coverage is incredibly complex, but match coverage has become increasingly popular in the NFL in recent years. Is that correct?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And the Fangio quarters stuff has kind of started to spread around the league after it kind of had a fair bit of success stopping Patrick Mahomes and that kind of group. So that has definitely started to spread. And as you get more into quarters, you start learning about the different types of checks you can do with quarters and the different kinds of matches you can do with quarters. So rather than just dropping to 4 deep zones, it's kind of inefficient to just have guys dropping to their zones. If teams go with a 3-by-1 where they have trips on one side and you're dropping to quarters coverage, you're going to have multiple defenders on the far side of the field that aren't doing anything. So therefore you can adapt your rules and build in different checks where you're matching up a lot better. So even though you're in quarters, you can match up to those different types of formations, and it covers those different distributions of routes a lot better rather than leaving some obvious holes in zones and having guys on one side of the field covering nobody. So you're right. It is incredibly complex, and the levels of details and the communication involved is very, very intricate. But when executed well, it's about the best of both worlds in coverage, because you get you don't have to play pure man to man, so you're not having to find corners that can lock down guys man to man. But you're also not having the dead spots in zones. You're matching everyone. It's kind of the best of both worlds.
To what extent did the Commanders with Joe Witt Jr. as defensive coordinator employ match coverage?
Well, they certainly wanted to. And Joe Witt came from a kind of quarters world when he was with the Packers, and they did some of that match stuff. So they tried to in their first year, because in Dallas, when it was Joe Witt and Dan Quinn running that defense in Dallas, they played man, but they played man match. So they would have a single deep safety in the middle of the field, and they would play man coverage, but they would match it. So they would, if there was a crossing route that your outside corner was really out leveraged on, he would pass it off to someone inside, and that the slot corner would take it, and then the outside corner would take the slot receiver. So they would pass things off and match their coverages to make it easier for them and give them better leverage. But when they tried to do that at the start of 2024, their corners just couldn't play it, and we saw tons of busts when they were trying to do that, and guys like Benjamin St. Juste were really struggling with that. And so they kind of had to dial it back in 2024. This year, they didn't really try to dial that up. I think they tried to just play more pure man, was my feeling on it. And they obviously had issues with that. And then they kind of switched to more basic spot dropping zone. And at the end of the year, they were playing a ton of zone, but it was just kind of quite basic spot dropping stuff, not too much match stuff. There is obviously some elements of match coverage in most modern defenses now, but certainly not to the degree of what you saw with the Vikings. So yeah, it's not something that we've seen in Washington for a while. As I say, they tried to do it, they just didn't execute it very well, and they kind of had to strip back and be like, we don't have the personnel for this right now.
When you think about the Commanders' current roster, are there any defensive players who strike you as guys who could especially thrive with Daronte Jones as defensive coordinator if he does what we anticipate that he'll do?
Yeah, well, the standout one would be Trey Amos, because he played a lot of match stuff when he was first starting in college. When he first went to Alabama, I think he spent a year at Alabama, didn't he? And then moved to a couple of different colleges. But obviously, Alabama are well known for their match coverages under Nick Saban. And there's quite a few like young corners that come from those kind of the Alabama tree of guys that come up learning those match coverages and do really well from that. So and you could see there was some zone coverages later in the year when Dan Quinn took over where you could see Amos was communicating things really well. Like there was a very typical example of a match coverage would be like the outside receiver breaks inside on an underneath route or a shallow cross, and so the outside corner passes him off to the slot. And there was one example that I went back and watched today where you could see him communicating to Mikey Samerstill in the slot saying, hey, look, you pick up that underneath route. Typically the call is under or something like that. And Samerstill peeled off his guy and picked that guy up. And then Trey Amos picked up Samerstill's guy and they passed it off really well. So Amos seems like someone that could do that really well. Samerstill, I wonder whether maybe he's someone that could do that. Another guy that I thought was actually, which surprised me when I went back and looking at Washington's defense today, was Jeremy Reeves actually did quite a nice job communicating with Amos in particular about passing things off when they did play some quarter stuff. I personally have always been slightly down on Reeves as a defender. He's one of the best special teams players in the league and has been for a while. And he definitely provides a spark on defense with his hitting, but I've always felt his coverage has been inconsistent and his tackling can be inconsistent. But when you looked at when they were playing some coverage stuff and they were passing things off, the guys that were communicating it well were guys like Reeves and Amos. So I wonder whether he's someone that if you're going to get into those kind of 3 safety packages that the Vikings did, whether Reeves might be that third safety. I'm not necessarily sure you'd ideally want him as your starting safety, but I wonder whether he could be your third safety in those kind of packages. So he stood out. The one I wonder is Frankie Louvu. Because I don't know if he's got the same football IQ as a guy like Andrew Van Ginkel that can identify those things like when they have those edge rushers being able to drop off into coverage, like Frankie Louvu could do that as a linebacker that is more of a traditional linebacker than an edge rusher. I don't think you get the juice of him going forward as an edge rusher when he plays on the edge. When he's a linebacker and he's blitzing up the middle on a running back, that's when you get him at his best. So I don't know if you necessarily would want him in that role. But if you're looking for someone to fill that role, they currently don't really have anyone on the roster that fits it. So Louvu would be the closest one to that. So I kind of wonder whether they feel like Louvu could be that kind of fake edge guy that kind of rushes, but is also the guy that they're happy to drop off into coverage when they blitz guys from the other side.
Final question. So it sure seems like in the NFL, a head coach with an offensive background is more likely to call offensive plays than a head coach with a defensive background is to call defensive plays. I on Tuesday watched the entirety of Mike McCarthy's introductory press conference as Pittsburgh Steelers head coach. He, during the presser, said that he, as Steelers head coach, will be calling offensive plays, and nobody was surprised. Nobody thought twice about that. However, here we are with the Commanders. They have a head coach in Dan Quinn with an excellent track record as a defensive coordinator. Quinn was the Seattle Seahawks defensive coordinator January 2013 to February 2015. The Seahawks regular season rankings in total defense per DVOA with Quinn as defensive coordinator, 2013 number 1, 2014, number 1. Quinn was the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator January 2021 to February 2024. The Cowboys regular season rankings in total defense per DVOA with Quinn as defensive coordinator 2021, number 4, 2022, number 4, 2023, number 5. So Dan Quinn has had a top 5 defense in terms of DVOA in each of his 5 seasons as an NFL defensive coordinator, and yet him serving as the Commanders' defensive play caller beyond taking over for the demoted Joe Witt over the final 7 games of the team's 2025 regular season seemingly was an afterthought. Now, I have no problem with Quinn not remaining as defensive play caller. I'm excited about Daronte Jones, but I do find this phenomenon interesting. Do you have a theory for why a head coach with an offensive background is more likely to call offensive plays than a head coach with a defensive background is more likely to call defensive plays?
My theory behind that, and it is only a theory, is that when the game management situations that a head coach needs to be really alert to are typically when their offense is on the field, right? So when you're thinking of end-of-game situations, using timeouts, 2-minute drills, those are the things that you want. Like when are you going to kick a field goal? When are you going to go for it? Those kind of game management situations are typically when it's the offense on the field, and that's when, if you're a defensive coordinator, you're not paying as much attention. That's when your team is on the sideline and you're reviewing what just happened the series before, and that's when you're talking to players and being like, what did you see? This is what we might try to do against this kind of look this time. So they're not paying as much attention. Whereas when you're an offensive-minded head coach, you're obviously calling plays and you're in the moment. So it's much easier to manage the game when in those game key situations when your unit is on the field involved in them. And so I think as a defensive-minded head coach, my guess is that Dan Quinn wants to be able to manage the game and know when to use timeouts and know when to go for it and when to not. And if he's the defensive coordinator, he can't be paying as much attention to what's going on the field on offense while trying to talk to his defense and making sure that they're getting the next set of plays that they want to run, and then maybe learn from what corner is seeing this, what safety is seeing this, and trying to figure out what calls are working and what might not be. So that would be my theory to it. I don't know whether that has anything to it or not, because there are some defensive head coaches that did call plays, but you're right. It does seem like more defensive head coaches are guys that want to be more game managers and not call plays, whereas offensive coaches tend to be like, hey, I got here from being a play caller, so I want to keep calling plays. But I couldn't tell you exactly why, but that would be my theory.
Yeah, what you said makes a lot of sense. Commanders analyst Mark Bullock of Bullock's Film Room, which you can find at markbullock.substack.com. Mark, thanks, and we'll talk soon.
Of course, talk soon.
All right. Hey, if you enjoy this podcast, check out BGO Blind Pig, the official podcast of BGObsession.com. BGO Blind Pig is great. It is a roundtable discussion of the Washington Commanders. It's like you and a bunch of your buddies who are Commanders fans are hanging out and talking about the team. The conversation is smart and fun and respectful. I've had the pleasure of being on the BGO Blind Pig podcast. It was a ton of fun. Enhance your Commanders content and check out the BGO Blind Pig podcast. You can find the BGO Blind Pig podcast on YouTube and on any major podcast provider. Make BGObsession.com the home for your burgundy and gold obsession, and make the BGO Blind Pig podcast part of your Commanders podcast rotation. Let's talk college basketball. Home conference wins for Georgetown and George Mason on Wednesday night. Georgetown in the 2025-2026 regular season improved to 11-10 overall, including 3-7 in the Big East, with a 70-61 win over DePaul at Capital One Arena on Wednesday night. Georgetown never trailed. The Hoyas' defense was good. They allowed DePaul to go 11 for 28 on threes, but held DePaul to just 61 points, just 13 for 30 on twos, and just 5 free throw attempts, of which DePaul made just 2. Georgetown's offense was good. The Hoyas went 5 for 12 on threes, 19 19 for 35 on twos and 17 for 18 on free throws, and had 16 assists versus 10 turnovers. Georgetown's leading scorer was 6'2" Malik Mack. He, in 30 minutes as a starter, had 16 points, 7 assists versus 1 turnover and 2 rebounds. He went 0 for 2 on threes and just 3 for 6 on twos, but also 10 for 10 on free throws. And so Georgetown now has won 2 consecutive games off a 6-game losing streak. The Hoyas this past Saturday afternoon notched an 81-78 win at Providence in a game in which they overcame a 21-point second-half deficit. We joined the post-game press conference of Georgetown head coach Ed Cooley late night on Wednesday night, had this exchange.
After the heartbreaks, the last 2 games you have closed out, just this group staying together, the coaching staff and the locker room all staying together. So what does it say about the closeness of this unit that you have this season?
We've been together since late May, early June, and I don't know if that's too long, right? Going over to Canada, right, playing the next. We've been together a long time. Trust. This comes down to trust when you're that long. Again, we could have easily folded on Saturday, down 20, losing 6 or 7 in a row, whatever it was. Our heads weren't down. We're competing at a really, really high level. And when that may be an aha moment for our guys to also trust. I'm telling them, I think we have a really good basketball team. We just haven't been fortunate in some of the closer games that I think we do a great job coaching in as a staff. In close games, we've been able to close out over our career, and hopefully we can get on that roll right now. But it's a lot of games left to be played, right? We want to take this one game at a time, continue to defend, share the ball, and appreciate the opportunity to represent Georgetown.
So Georgetown has some good players and has had some close losses. The hope was that this would be a step forward season for the Hoyas in what is their 3rd season with Ed Cooley as head coach. They had 1-7 in the Big East. We're looking like they might be having a disastrous season, but now 2 consecutive wins. Good to see that. Also with this win for Georgetown over DePaul on Wednesday night, the win was the Hoyas' first home Big East win in this regular season. We, during Ed Cooley's post-game press conference late night on Wednesday night, had this exchange between bracketologist Patrick Stevens of the Washington Post and Cooley.
You mentioned being able to come back against Providence and kind of push some of that stuff behind. To kind of break the seal on the home thing for conference play, is that just another step you think that you guys can just kind of build on that, and it's one less thing to have to worry about there?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we spoke about today, and I appreciate you asking that question because, you got to win your home games, right? And I really I want to make sure I appreciate all the people that came out to the game today with the weather. Because, the roads are tough, right? They're not plowed. Everybody's probably still plowed in, snowed in. Hopefully the city can do a great job of trying to get everybody's roads cleaned and some salt down on them because the roads are tough. So I really appreciate everybody that came out. Appreciate you guys for coming out, to even have this conversation here because, the roads are pretty treacherous.
Yeah, official attendance for this game at Capital One Arena on Wednesday night, 3,422. Next up for Georgetown at Butler, Saturday at noon. George Mason, in this regular season, improved to 19-2 overall, including 7-1 in the A-10, with a 60-52 win over Davidson at Eagle Bank Arena in Fairfax, Virginia on Wednesday night. Official attendance for this game, by the way, 3,604. So, George Mason outdrew Georgetown. What does that say about the state of each program? The Patriots won the second half 32-18, won despite going just 5 for 18 on threes and just 13 for 22 on free throws and having just 9 assists versus 13 turnovers. This was not a pretty performance by Mason, but it did go 16 for 29 on twos, and Mason's defense was really good. The Patriots held Davidson to just 8 for 26 on threes, just 12 for 29 on twos, and just 6 free throw attempts, of which Davidson made just 4. I mentioned Georgetown registering its first home conference win in this regular season. Mason in this regular season now is 14-0 at home and now is 46-5 at Eagle Bank Arena with Tony Skinn as head coach. What a job Tony Skinn is doing. He was a player on Mason's famous 2005-2006 Final Four team. He was an assistant coach for Maryland for the 2022-2023 season, was named Mason head coach on March 30th, 2023. He became Mason's head coach off Kim English leaving his job as Mason head coach to become Providence's head coach, succeeding Ed Cooley, who had become Georgetown's head coach. Skin was named A-10 Coach of the Year for last regular season, and Mason this past March 27th announced a contract extension for Skin through the 2029-2030 season. Next up for George Mason at St. Bonaventure, Saturday evening at 6:30. And that'll do it for you and me for now. Keep the feedback coming. You can hit me up on X at Al Galdi. You can email me the Al Galdi podcast at yahoo.com. Friday show, episode 1250. We'll have much more on the Washington Commanders. Also on Friday's show, I'll talk Washington Capitals and Washington Wizards. The Caps are at the Detroit Red Wings Thursday night at 7:30. The Wizards are home to the Milwaukee Bucks Thursday night at 7. Have a great rest of your Thursday, and I'll talk to you on Friday.